Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Grabois. This is SoundWaves. We're in the middle of season 15 of SoundWaves, and it's always great to see the audience out here to hear these fascinating talks that people give and to hear some music. This year, we've moved to exploring single themes that kind of carry across an entire season. So this season, we are talking about scale. We started at the minutest scale and grew a little bit for the second presentation. And now we're at the kind of Earth-size macro scale. And on April 24th, we will, which is another Friday night, we will, well, it's a Friday all day, but at SoundWaves at 7:30, we will explore astronomical scale. And that's been really fun. If anybody has ideas about other themes that they would be interested in exploring, feel free to send me an email. I'm easily found on the on the music website, music.wisc.edu. Welcome to our wonderful new recital hall, Collins Recital Hall, which is just an amazing place. And we'll be moving back to the Discovery Building for the majority of our presentations. They were having a renovation this year, which moved us in here, which frankly is kind of great because we have a piano handy here, but we also love doing SoundWaves over in Discovery. So make sure to look and see which place each event is happening. If there's anybody who doesn't receive mailings about SoundWaves events and wants to, there is a mailing list on your way out. You can feel free to sign up. And we have moved to starting with some music. And so we are going to just do a little jam here to get started. I'm going to ask my colleagues to come on out. Come on out, colleagues. This is Arun Luthra and Todd Hammes, and we were thinking about what can we do thinking about Earth-size scale and jamming and improvising some music. So what we came up with is, here we have an instrument that probably has African origins, I would guess, and adopted into the music of the Caribbean to a large extent, the bongos. And then we have a saxophone, European heritage, but invented by a Belgian of all things, and but put into service and popularized and made amazing by jazz musicians. And then I will be playing the Continuum fingerboard over there, which is a modern electronic instrument. So we're kind of covering our bases globally with these instruments, and we'll play for you for about 5 minutes, and we'll see what happens. And then we'll get started with the lectures, and then we'll have a performance of this completely crazy piece, which I'll tell you about later.
Okay, that's hard to follow. Hi, everybody. My name is Nova. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Climate Solutions for Health Lab and also the Global Climate and Health Alliance. And I'm here to talk about the state of the climate, opportunities for a healthy planet. And I'm going to start with some bad news that climate change is getting worse. And there's a couple ways that we can measure this. There's a couple ways we can see this. One is we look at greenhouse gas emissions. By greenhouse gases, I mean carbon dioxide or methane, nitrous oxide, if you've heard of that. We can see by this graph, from 1960 all the way to 2024, atmospheric carbon dioxide levels have on trend been increasing, right? What does this mean? Why would I care about greenhouse gas emissions increasing? Well, they cause temperatures to increase, global average surface air temperatures to increase. So this graph, 1940 to 2025, this is much more stark, I think, than the other graph, right? Global temperatures are also increasing. What's causing the increase in temperatures? What's causing the increase in greenhouse gas emissions? One very big one is the combustion or the burning of fossil fuels. They emit these greenhouse gases. When I mean fossil fuels, I mean coal, oil, natural gas, right? But I also want to make it clear that we use fossil fuels for our everyday life. They're fully integrated into how we live, right? We burn fossil fuels to generate electricity and heat for our homes and buildings, right? Here in Wisconsin this winter, my apartment uses natural gas so that I stay warm in the negative 20 whatever degrees it was a couple days. We also use fossil fuels to produce energy for making things like cement, electronics, plastics, clothes, many others, right? As I said, it's very integrated into our economy. And then finally, we burn fossil fuels to power cars, trucks, ships, planes for travel. So every single person has a relationship with fossil fuels. Whether you didn't know and now you do, whether you like it or not like it, that's the reality, is we use fossil fuels in our everyday life. Why does this matter? Why do we care about fossil fuels, increasing greenhouse gas emissions, and increasing temperature? Well, what I look at is its impact to our health. And I'm going to walk you through how the burning of fossil fuels and climate change in general impacts our health. So we'll start with the increase in greenhouse gas emissions, right? When greenhouse gas emissions are increased, temperatures increased, what does this mean generally downstream? We'll see an increase, and are currently seeing an increase in extreme weather events. So that's flooding, wildfires, that big snowstorm on the East Coast that just happened, that bad storm got worse, right? We also will see more heat waves in particular. Last summer in Wisconsin was the hottest summer in Wisconsin on record. I remember that. That was not fun, honestly. Also, we'll see an increase in infectious diseases, specifically vector-borne diseases. So think of mosquitoes, malaria, West Nile virus. We're going to see an increase in these diseases because mosquitoes rely on the outside environment, and they require a hot kind of surrounding, right? A warm surrounding. So now they're able to travel to new places because now it's warmer in other places. So all three of these things impact our health, right? If we think of flooding as an extreme weather event, right? That might cause us injury if we're in the flood. It might cause us some post-traumatic stress. Also, we may not be able to get clean water to drink, right? For heat, we're thinking about heat stroke, especially if you're not able to have anything to cool you down. And infectious diseases, I think that's pretty obvious. So this is downstream, right? Climate change impacts downstream. Why don't we go back upstream and look at what's causing this, right? Let's go back to fossil fuels. And fossil fuels is one way that that's causing greenhouse gas emissions. Fossil fuels themselves, when we burn them, also emit, there we go, air pollution, water pollution, all sorts of other pollution, right? So whether we are downstream of a fossil fuel plant or downwind of a fossil fuel plant, we might get air pollution, we might get water pollution. Air pollution in particular is kind of scary. They have these, they emit what's called particulate matter 2.5. They're very, very, very small, smaller, thinner than a piece of hair. They go deep into your lungs, kind of wreaking havoc. They can cause premature mortality, cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, and every day it just seems like you're just having trouble breathing, but over the long term could cause real health damage. So both of these impact our health. And then if we go even further upstream and maybe zoom out more, we think about how fossil fuels are so integrated into our society. What are the choices and decisions being made that can also impact our health? So then we should look at the political, historical, and social systems that dedicate how we live and work. Maybe you're a fossil fuel worker. That will have impacts to your health. How much privilege you have in society. Some of you may have seen that some fossil fuel plants are in specifically low-income areas or communities of color, right? That's not by accident. That is a policy choice, and it's based on privilege and also based on power. There we go. So all of these things kind of come together and impact our health in not just one way, multiple ways. So that's a lot of bad news. Sorry, I had to get that over with. But here's some good news, that climate solutions are getting better, right? So when I talk about climate solutions, I'm talking about reducing these greenhouse gas emissions by changing things in our society. One such thing is renewables, wind and solar. So they emit no greenhouse gas emissions, and they're getting cheaper. So this bar chart here is looking at the cost of electricity, and we see onshore wind and utility solar are now cheaper than gas, and offshore wind is cheaper than coal. And they are getting even more cheaper. So what does this mean? That means what was once a technology that was so expensive that nobody thought it would go anywhere, now is not only comparable to fossil fuels, but cheaper. That's great news. What else is that solar in particular, solar installations have far surpassed any projections that we had, right? So these, let me see. There we go. These gray lines were all International Energy Agency predictions. This is where solar is now, solar installations, right? So it's far exceeding, which is great because we need a lot of solar to do this. Electric vehicle shares, right? So in 2010, the percent of electric vehicles in the global auto sale market was 0. Now it's almost over a quarter. That is remarkable over what, a 15-ish year span? That's great to see. And electric vehicles in particular, you're reducing transportation emissions, but you're also potentially reducing upstream emissions depending on where that electricity is coming from. If that electricity is coming from coal or natural gas, we're still having some emissions there. But if we pair that with renewables, all right, now we're in business. And I just want to show some real pictures so that you're not just looking at graphs all the time, of climate solutions all around us, right? They're easier than you think. So on this left side is a new bike lane, and this is from just Madison Reddit. If you haven't gone through that rabbit hole, highly recommend. But this is just a picture of one of the new bike lanes. And you might not have thought that a bike lane would be a climate solution, but basically what it's doing is it's incentivizing folks not to use their car and instead either bike or walk to wherever they need to go, because it's making it safer. This middle here is actually a project going on at UW-Madison Extension for agrivoltaics, which essentially is just pairing agricultural production for crops with energy production, specifically in this case with solar, but it could also be with wind, right? And this is happening in Wisconsin. And then also electric buses here. So Madison rolled out this big bus rapid transit. Part of that was including electric buses. I've been on it, it's really fun. But that is a climate solution as well, because again, you're reducing these emissions through the tailpipe. Okay, so I've told you the problem, and it's getting worse. I've also told you that we have solutions. We have the tools. We have a handyman over here ready to go. So what does this mean? This means this is all preventable, right? We can do something about this, right? We can fix it, even. Just like Bob the Builder, right? Can we fix it? Okay, you'll have another try. Don't worry, don't worry. That was pretty good, though. That was pretty good. So this is preventable, all right? And even further, we can actually improve society by doing these solutions. I'll show you what I mean here. So on the left are climate mitigation strategies, right? To reduce greenhouse gases. One is to replace fossil fuels with renewables. Another is to have a more local and sustainable food system. And maybe another one is to replace vehicles with either public transit and bike lanes or even EVs, right? So these are all reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But what they can also do is provide something called a co-benefit, which is an additional positive outcome from one of these actions. And what I look at specifically is I look at health co-benefits, if you didn't see that coming. Health co-benefits. So if we look at this solution here, replacing fossil fuels with renewables, that can actually help to reduce premature mortality because we're also reducing air pollution. If we have a more local and sustainable food system, we might be able to increase access to healthier foods and nutritious foods for everybody. If we replace vehicles and incentivize active travel like bikes and sidewalks, we'd be able to also improve physical activity amongst folks. And if you do all of these and you implement it right and you design the policy right, which is really the thing to remember here, is you can also get equity co-benefits. So that means we can have more local ownership over things, improve inclusivity, have better access to basic resources. My research specifically as a postdoc is looking at how can we maximize these co-benefits, whether in better policy design or better policy implementation. The key thing here, though, this is the greatest public health opportunity that we have, climate action. The key is that we have to do it fast. And right now we're doing it fairly slow. We have to pick up the speed. And you might be wondering, why have we not gone fast yet? There is a problem, we have solutions, we have everything we need. Well, I'll talk about 3, although there's plenty of other ones. One is powerful special interests, so thinking about fossil fuel companies. They hire a lot of lobbyists, both in the US government and also internationally, right? This is halting climate action. Climate misinformation, disinformation. There's a lot of inaccurate things out there, and it's easy to take that up. And 3, there's political challenges and volatility, specifically in energy policy. And we can see this just recently in the change of administrations. Biden passed the largest clean energy investment in US history. Trump has repealed it. That's within a 3-year time span, so that's very quick. And also, I will say, climate action is slow because of new challenges. So here in Wisconsin in particular, we've got data centers, or a proposed data center, I should say, one in Port Washington, Wisconsin. This is like the aerial view. And data centers provide a very new challenge, particularly for energy demand and water use. But then there's also people who are against it and doing protests, like here on the right, and also announcing a potential moratorium on data centers. So all of this to say that any local and larger action is worth it. So whether you're going out to a protest or saying more about climate change, that's worth it and that's important. Whether it's riding your bike instead of driving, it's worth it. Or if you're President Biden signing a big bill, that's also worth it and important. All of these things are worth it. So I'm going to leave you with 4 messages here that I want you to remember. Number 1, climate change is getting worse. That's the bad news. The good news, climate solutions are getting better. Unfortunately, there are political and powerful obstacles against meaningful climate action, but here's the best news, that climate action is the largest public health opportunity. We need to do it fast. And so I'll ask you again, can we fix it? Yes, we can. Perfect, thank you so much.
How is my voice? Good, all right. I think I'm going to stick to this. I'm not very technological, so bear with me. I'm Aslıgül Göçmen. I'm a professor of geography and environmental studies. I'm also an urban planner. I studied, practiced, and taught urban and regional planning. And I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to be going right after Nova, because actually I'm going to add to some of the solutions that Nova has shared with us. Today I'm going to concentrate my talk on nature and the city. And also I want to say I was really excited when Dan reached out to me and talked about macro scale, because I do work with cities. I also work with neighborhood-sized communities, a little micro scale, so I do different scale work, and scale is really important for us as geographers, cartographers, and urban planners. So, historically, Western thought has emphasized the domination of nature by humans and separation of cities from nature. We see that in the medieval times, where there were city walls separating city from nature, where city was seen as safe, predictable, and nature was seen as untamed and dangerous. The view still remained that nature should be separated from the city. But with the industrialization, we saw that city now became crowded, polluted, sources of unsanitary conditions, whereas nature was seen as pristine and an antidote to the city. This cartoon, you may not be able to read it. It says, "It's so lovely out here. You wonder why they have it so far from the city," is one of my favorite cartoons. It just shows us our prolonging for nature, but it also tells us that the very same characteristics that drive us to nature are the very first things that get destroyed when we actually go out there, build out there, and produce many developments like what we see over here. These are typically automobile-dependent, low-density, and predominantly residential developments that we see across our country and many other places, and they bring many environmental, social, and economic costs with them. Well, the current thought with the sustainable development movement and modern urban planning is that we cannot treat nature separate from the city, and that we should bring nature and city together. We should integrate them. So there are 2 distinct paths we can take to do so. The first path basically tells us, let's limit our impact, our city's impact on the nature. And then the second path tells us, let's bring nature into our cities. So today I'm going to talk to you about these two different approaches and give you some examples. All right, so this might be a shock to some of us, but we typically, as planners, say, after all those years of planning low-density development, we now say compact is better. All right, so it's better for many different things, and adding to Noah's presentation, we use less fossil fuels because we can now concentrate our development in smaller footprints. We can bring different land uses together, right? With that, we are also not extending our per capita contribution to air pollution and water pollution through stormwater runoff, for instance. And we're also basically limiting the destruction of environmental resources at the edge of the city and beyond, such as forests, wetlands, productive lands, and open spaces. More and more we are seeing mixed-use developments. By mixed-use, what I mean is places like State Street, where we have multi-story buildings with lower floors dedicated to, let's say, retail establishments and businesses like cafes, restaurants, stores, banks, doctors' offices, and upstairs as residential residential uses, or we see neighborhood centers being developed in predominantly residential areas. With this mixed-use idea, the idea is basically that we make places more accessible by foot, by bike, by public transit, and so on. One thing about the compact development, we now also make public transit feasible. When we have low-density spread-out patterns, public transit is not feasible in most places. So I will say compact is better for many reasons compared to urban sprawl that I showed about with the low-density developments. So how are we doing with this? We have several things going on since, especially since 1990s. We are trying to provide more compact development. Portland, Oregon, actually the effort started in the 1970s. It's a prime case for curbing urban sprawl at the macro metropolitan level. And basically what we see in Portland is with the investment in public transit, transit corridors, and land use regulations that basically helped increase density, building density, as well as mixed uses have created a lively downtown and many lively neighborhoods. And also we see in Portland the use of the roads beyond the car and by bikers, by public transit users. In this case, we see light rail and bus as the public transit. So this is a very new idea, but the ideal is not really that new, but this has been growing. The idea of the 15-minute city concept has been growing in popularity. It was developed about 10 years ago, and it really gained popularity during COVID-19. So the idea is that you should be able to, even in a large city, you should be able to walk from your home and access your daily needs within 15 minutes. So this was really shepherded by Anne Hidalgo, who is the mayor of Paris, who made one of her priorities to reduce, in fact, half the cars on the street as a measure to, combat the climate crisis. During COVID, when the Parisians were restricted to their homes and only their neighborhoods, I had friends who were telling me they had to get out of their home with their residency addresses and show, they had to show that they weren't leaving their neighborhood. This idea became quite popular, and in fact now is embraced by C40, which is the coalition about 100 cities that have invested in finding solutions for the changing climate. So this idea is really gaining popularity. One other thing to remember with this is that, like the co-benefits that Noah was mentioning, we have co-benefits of this, that it's not just helping reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also helping social interactions. It's helping the time and money spent traveling to different destinations, and in general, one's quality of life. So the idea of this 15-minute city concept isn't really that new. We have had since 1990s the concept new urbanism, which is actually something that is not quite new either. New urbanism mimics the traditional neighborhoods from a century ago, from 1920s. So the idea with new urbanism is that you have a neighborhood center like the one we see in this development in Florida. And then you have residential areas, but you also have a school, you have grocery stores, businesses, amenities, and different types of housing, so that you can find something for yourself, your family, and something that you can actually enjoy while also accessing different urban amenities. The 15-minute city concept really comes from this, because at the center, of these developments is the businesses and the school and so on, and everybody can get to them. So the Middleton Hills is the most known example in our region, and you might be familiar. It's adjacent to Pheasant Branch Creek Conservatory, and it hosts many businesses. It hosts different types of residential buildings. Half of the neighborhood is single family, the other half is townhouses, condos, and multi-family units. So I mentioned one path, limiting the impact of urbanization on the natural environment. The other path is actually bringing nature into the city. And within that, we have one particular movement called the biolific cities. And it stems from humans' innate drive to be near nature and interacting with nature on a very regular basis. This is, it's becoming popular as well, and in some cities, in fact, they have been using this nature pyramid, like the food pyramid, and the idea is that you should be able to get to nature, observe nature, be with nature on a very regular basis, on a daily basis in your own neighborhood, like watching some butterflies, watching some birds, or you can go to some natural preserve in your own city at a weekly basis. The other ones actually, the other scales are not quite relevant to the scale that I work at, but these are also very important. One thing that I want to mention here is, this brings a lot of benefits. Bringing nature brings a lot of benefits to human well-being. We see decreased blood pressures among individuals with hypertension. We see lowered anxiety. We see faster recovery times when people actually have regular view of nature from their windows. So this really gets from these ideas and tries to get people to be with nature on a regular basis. In fact, I assign a bonus assignment to my students, and I ask them to spend 1 hour in nature and, report on their experience. And this tells me, confirms the empirical studies. My students, after that exercise, tell me they feel more grounded, happier, more relaxed, and more energetic. And having the nature has many different benefits, other benefits as well. So a couple examples I'm going to show. Singapore is a prime example of biophilic cities, and they have implemented it at different scales. The building scale that we are looking at became possible because they have a great regulation that says if you are to build a new building, you have to create at least the same amount of green space as your floor, as your first floor. So we see a lot of buildings that have green walls and green roofs, but we also see other things like this really easily recognizable botanical garden and many larger areas that also act as stormwater retention areas. So we can integrate nature in different scales in our cities. Building scale is one, like I mentioned, and it has been applied throughout the United States, in fact, in medicine as well. Several of our campus buildings have green roofs, and they help retain heat. They also help cool the urban areas and help with managing stormwater runoff. So even though when we have heavier rains, it's not going to help us not have a flood, but it's going to help us manage that flood a bit better. And we are looking at the green roof here at Chicago City Hall. And at the neighborhood scale, we can have neighborhood parks, which also help with social interactions. And in newly developed areas, we can have protected open spaces. In fact, these two images at the bottom are from my own study of conservation subdivisions, so suburban areas in Waukesha County. And in many places, we observed wildlife in these areas, some pollinators, and we are going to get into that with our next talk. We can have nature, we can integrate at district scale. This is an example of uncovering basically streams called stream daylighting, uncovering them from decades of being buried under concrete. So not only that, when we uncover them, we bring green areas to our cities. These areas actually help quite a bit with stormwater management because concrete and asphalt are two surfaces that contribute to increased stream runoff and major flooding in our cities. And in fact, at the city level, we see even much larger areas, much new constructions to handle that stormwater runoff. And this is an example of the sponge city model that's been implemented in China for the past 10, 12 years. And again, this helps not only bring that nature for our enjoyment, but also has the co-benefit of stormwater runoff. So these are some very new things that are happening in my area, but these ideas aren't necessarily that new. For instance, we have Central Park, New York, that has been, with us for almost 200 years now, right? But it was part of a particular movement called City Beautiful movement, where urban green was seen to make the cities more aesthetically pleasing, as well as bring enjoyment to its residents without necessarily bringing all the co-benefits to our cities, co-benefits, environmental, social, and economic co-benefits. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I will be very happy to discuss any ideas with you. Thank you very much.
There we go. First of all, thanks so much, everyone, for being here. It's super fun to spend your Friday night with you. Thanks for taking the time. I hope to not make you regret that too much. And I know I'm the last thing between you and some fun music. So mostly I'll show you some hopefully interesting videos of cool things that bees do. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is a little cheating on the scales question a little bit. I'm going to talk really about linking the micro to the macro scale. And I'm going to do that by thinking about the lives of tiny animals on a big planet. So one of my purposes here is, by the end of this brief talk, I want to kind of convince you that bee personalities actually matter for your health. So stay tuned for why that matters. Okay, but first, my name is James Crall. I'm in the Department of Entomology here at UW-Madison, and I think a lot about insects. And that's because they're amazing creatures, but that are also astoundingly diverse and sort of one of the really miracles of evolution. So you heard earlier this number of potentially 8.7 million species of eukaryotes on the planet. The vast majority of those are insects. So we think that there's about 5.5 million species of just insects. I say we think because we really don't know. We've only formally described about 1 million, which is still quite a bit. But the range of guesses is somewhere between like 2 and 20 million. Who knows? But the point is an astounding diversity of insects on the planet. And they play critical roles in just about every ecosystem. And we know them well as, say, pests and vectors of disease. But they're also really important sort of drivers of ecosystem function. So they are the most important predators of insects, are predators. They're food for other animals like birds. And one of the functions that we care a lot about that I'm going to tell you a bit about today is their role in pollination. So this astounding diversity is really important for our well-being too. So I said, there's just this kind of remarkable diversity that evolution has produced over the course of hundreds of millions of years. So you heard about some deep history in our first talk tonight. That is really just scratching the surface in some ways on the hundreds of millions of years that insects have been sort of dominating our planet. So given those important roles and the astounding diversity in this kind of miracle of evolution, there's been enormous concern over the ways in which those populations and that diversity of insects might be declining, especially in response to anthropogenic environmental change. So raise your hand if you've heard about the bee or insect apocalypse. Yes, so enormous, just in the last few years really, public concern over declines in insect populations. So this is a map estimated over the last couple centuries of declines in insect species richness. So you see a lot of red on that, which indicates declines of the kind of diversity and number of different species. But importantly, those declines are not monolithic. So certainly there is evidence that insect populations are declining, but as we've started pulling together these global data sets, which it turns out are actually pretty hard to come by, it's been really hard to study insects systematically. We don't do it in a very routine way, and they don't leave great traces. They disappear very quickly. But pulling all the data that we do have together has told us that it's not just a pattern of decline. Turns out there's a lot of heterogeneity. So in certain environments, if, for example, you look at the effect of climate here, this is sort of increases in temperature. In certain kinds of environments, so in intact natural habitat, actually climate anomalies are okay to maybe slightly good for insects. But in intensive agricultural systems, that's where we see declines in the diversity of insects, and in both diversity and abundance. So that's true in places. Insects are kind of doing differently in different places. It's also true across different groups of insects. Some are doing pretty well, actually. You heard about the pests and disease vectors that might actually be increasing under climate, but others are sort of precipitously declining. So one of the key challenges is, for us as a field, is actually understanding that global complexity, right? So why are certain species in certain places doing well? Why are there winners but also losers? So I kind of think about that problem through the lens of my favorite set of organisms, the beautiful bumblebees. So I'm going to bring you a little bit into, for the micro part of this, think about the world of bumblebees in particular. And bumblebees are fuzzy and cute, and also an example of one of the most amazing other feats of evolution, which is the evolution of social behavior. So we're used to thinking about bees as highly social organisms. Turns out, if you look at the evolutionary history of insects and the kind of total diversity, those are the minority. So just there in green are the kind of social species. Only about 5% of this total, of the 20,000 species of bees on the planet are actually properly social. But they play a really outsized role in basic natural ecosystems and also in crop pollination. So we care a lot about what happens in those insect societies. Just some examples of the remarkable things that social insects do. This is a giant Asian honeybee colony that display these remarkable collective behaviors. So this is shimmering behavior. This is a kind of honeybee, a different species than we have here. But in response to kind of something approaching, a looming stimulus, they have what is kind of like the wave at Camp Randall, right? They all wave their wings in this coordinated action that is meant to scare off predators. So just one of many, many examples of absolutely remarkable collective behaviors in social insects. So if we return to that question, why are some species doing well and others aren't, and in general, why is it so hard to predict responses and kind of understand them? I would argue that some of the reasons that those responses are hard to understand is some of the same reasons that these systems are so fascinating, and that's they're remarkably complex and heterogeneous. So if you think about, in this case, a stingless bee colony, that's actually composed of a whole bunch of individuals. And each one is doing a different thing. They have their own mind, right? Or brain, at least. We can talk about the definition of the mind separately. And on a larger scale, if we think about whole communities of plants and pollinators, there are also these remarkably complex and diverse systems. And at both of those scales, one of the things we've come to appreciate more and more is they're not static. They're not just sort of accepting the environment. They're actually responding really dynamically to it. So within a colony, there's all this heterogeneity in who's interacting with who or who's doing what. And at the scale of whole ecological communities, again, who is interacting with who actually responds really dynamically to environmental change. And that makes these systems absolutely fascinating, but also very challenging to study because they have all this intrinsic flexibility. So one of the things that I'm really interested in my work is thinking about some of that flexibility in the behavior of bees. So this is a kind of typical day in the life of a bumblebee foraging out in the environment, and we're really used to seeing this, right? So in neighborhood gardens, we'll see this all the time. But I want to convince you that this is totally amazing. What you're seeing is an itty-bitty organism flying through a physically complex environment that is also dynamic, right? It's like flying a helicopter through skyscrapers that are moving. It's doing all that with all the energy it needs on its own back and with orders of magnitude fewer neurons than we have in our brains. So amazing behavior just associated with this everyday activity of getting food. They do this in not only those nice, pretty warm, everyday gardens, they do this in some pretty challenging conditions. So this is a bumblebee worker up at about 10,000 feet on the top of Mount Kita in Japan, out likewise doing the same thing, trying to find resources in this enormously challenging environment. And this is actually, happy space. The bumblebees evolved in the Tibetan Plateau. They're kind of challenging and cold weather enthusiasts, very Wisconsinite of them. Okay, so all that amazing behavior and adaptation is really actually aimed at one thing. We see them outside in the world, but they're really trying to do one very specific thing, which is bring all that food back to often a small, inconspicuous hole in the ground. Cool. So you'll see that worker. That was a worker flying in with little pollen loads on her leg, right? And actually incredibly hard to find, even though they're kind of everywhere. And what is happening is there's this sort of hidden world underneath that tiny little inconspicuous hole. And in there is a whole colony, at least in the middle of summer, where that incoming food is actually turned into new larvae and colony growth, because workers are then taking, for example, the protein and carbohydrate that they get from that food, actively feeding it to developing young, doing very vertebrate-like things, including incubating. We think of them as cold-blooded. They heat up their abdomen and keep their developing young warm. So they do some very cool, complex behaviors. So one of the things that we are really interested in and think about in the lab is actually not just looking at that mass of bees, but kind of thinking about the individuality within those colonies. So you'll notice some simple black and white markers on the back of these bees. It turns out those are basically name tags that a computer can read that we put on the back of every bee within a colony. And with that, we can do things like track the movement, social interactions, and key behaviors of every bee within a colony, like how much time they're spending nursing. You can see, if I can figure out, the queen is right there in the middle. The food is over here, so we can sort of pick up patterns of when they're doing what. And yeah, the sort of life of a simple social insect colony. I say simple because ants and honeybees have tens of thousands of workers. Bumblebees have like a few dozen to a couple hundred usually. So simple, fascinating societies. And one of the things we find when we start looking at all that name tag data is that actually individual bumblebees seem to kind of have personalities. So what do I mean by that? If we look at, for example, what behaviors a single worker is doing over the course of 2 days and show in different colors, different kinds of behavior, you see one worker that over the course of a couple days tends to like foraging and do that consistently. But if we compare that to other workers, what we actually see is a lot of consistency. So you see individual workers that like to forage all the time, individual workers that like to nurse or spend time kind of on the nest periphery, cleaning things up. And that corresponds, really interestingly, to actually individual variation in where bees spend time, even within this small box. This is like, 20 by 20 centimeters, right? So if you look at kind of the home range of a single bee on a single day and compare that to other days, it turns out she was kind of hanging out in the same part of the nest every day. And again, if we compare that across workers, you see these strong individual patterns of space use, connected behavior. You can imagine, your phone knows this about you, right? It's tracking you every day, and it knows where you spend time repeatedly, from day to day. So again, kind of strangely, maybe human-like behavior. One of the things that we do in the lab, too, is not just thinking about, how do individual bees vary, but how do these whole small societies cope with perturbation and stress? Again, thinking about, how is environmental change driving impacts on these populations? So we do things like watch them cope with a temperature stress. So here you can see as temperatures drop, the bees sort of cluster in the middle, and a thermal image camera on the right shows this sort of hot ball of activity around the developing young. And we also look at things like pesticide stress. And one of the lessons we've learned from that is that individual variation actually plays a really important role in sensitivity of the colony to stressors. And on the flip side, what context of a colony you're in, so if you're in a big, healthy colony, it turns out individuals are actually less sensitive too. So there's these complex links between the whole and the parts. And if we watch those sort of interactions play out over weeks of colony development, what we see is a slightly chaotic, but I think beautiful pattern of colony growth. You see they're not quite the organized honeybee colonies, but you see that these sort of individual variations, the personalities add up to these remarkable patterns of whole colony growth and survival. And I want you to keep this in mind when you hear some of the music coming up. What is the chaotic but beautifully organized sound of a colony look like? Where we want to end is by zooming up a little bit. So one thing we've learned within colonies is that individuals vary, and that variation matters for how the system responds to stress. It turns out we see similar things at a whole community scale. So we use, for example, new deep learning models to automatically identify what species are visiting what plants and when. We can do this for bumblebees and other kinds of solitary native bees, and actually use these tools to kind of scale up to a whole community view of how these systems are responding to certain kinds of stress. And one of them is temperature anomalies, or in sort of local temperature anomalies. So this is the most data-heavy thing I'm going to show you, but here's what I want you to take away. For each of these, the bottom part of that graph is showing how hot it is outside, and the y-axis, so up and down, is showing you how did they seek out warm environments or cool environments. And what I want you to see is just these different species, these different groups of insects actually respond differently to those conditions. And we think that that might either make some groups sort of more sensitive or less sensitive to stress as it plays out through the environment. You can think of this as like, where do you go when it's hot outside, right? Do you love to sweat and, do the hot yoga thing when there's a heat wave, or do you go seek shade, right? Whole species respond differently in those kinds of behaviors, and we think that matters for community level sensitivity and responses to stress. So these systems are complex. Their behavior is remarkable and important for sort of sensitivity to stress. Hopefully I convinced you about the sort of personality part of that, but what about the health? So pollinators play an incredibly important role in our food system, and especially in supporting the productivity of fruits, nuts, and vegetables that are critical for our health. And so these individual tiny lives and understanding how they cope with the stresses of existence on this planet are really important for us too. So just in takeaway sort of, if there's one thing I want you to take away, it's actually not only fascinating, but I think really important to think about how these minute details and these intricate details of the lives of insects actually amplify up to global patterns and impact us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much to our brilliant presenters. And maybe the band could come up now and I don't even know where they are. Hey, there they are. Let's come up and get settled. So we're going to play a really interesting piece that I think really, really captures the theme of the night pretty nicely. And it's a piece by the Dutch composer Louis Andriessen called Workers' Union. So I'm going to talk for 2 minutes maximum. Stop me after 2 minutes. Music is organized in various ways. Think of harmonies, chords. Think of melodies and their repetition and their change. Think of a rhythmic groove, maybe in a rock song. Think of also words of songs and how they can rhyme. There's so many ways that music gains coherence, and it's all about coherence. This piece is an attempt to portray musically the behavior of a large group of people. In this case, a union of workers. Imagine like a very large union hall packed to the gills with lots of people in a union trying to figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to behave, what their policy is going to be. And there will be a lot of unity because everybody has basically the same goals. Can you turn off your microphone for 1 second? Thank you. There will be a fair amount of unity, but also some scuffling and some disunity as well. So how do you represent that musically? And the way Andriessen has chosen to do this, first of all, the music is written on a staff with 1 line. Your typical musical staff has 5 lines and shows you what notes to play. The line means something in the middle of the range of your instrument. This piece is for loud instruments, specified in the score. And as the notes go up, you go up, but not according to any key or scale. And as they go down, you go down. We're all playing off the same music. So we all go up, we all go down. The rhythm is specified, so we do it together. The pitches aren't specified, So the harmony is different every time. The piece is different every single time. Also, the rhythms are fairly complex, such that we're going to fall into holes and make mistakes, and that's part of the fun of the piece, because groups of people aren't always thoroughly unified. So you'll see our attempt, and I'm sure you'll see that we have a great time playing this, our attempt at finding unity, but also our mess-ups are part of the fun. And the piece is somewhere between, depending on our tempo, 15 and 20 minutes. It's extremely rambunctious. I love playing it. I want to thank my colleagues so much for doing this with me, and we'll see you on April 24th. Thank you for coming. We hope to see you in April. Feel free to come talk to the presenters if you have questions.